Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, your home for all content, Lord of the Rings home. Today, I'm going to give my kind of personal take on the state of the game. And I'm going to try and do this every few months as well, just to kind of do this like swag state of the game, just give you my thoughts and opinions, where I think we're at, what I think needs to change. So I want to kind of split it up into things I think they've done well, and then things I think that need to change, looking forward into the future, what needs to happen. Just kind of discuss a lot of the events surrounding this sort of thing, and we'll hope that I don't ramble too much, I think. But this is the first one, so I kind of wanted to look back towards what happened at launch and where we've come since then. And I think basically the way I feel about it is I feel like we've righted the ship. What I mean by that is, like, you remember when that big boat was stuck in the Panama Canal and like they had like that one backhoe that was like trying to dig out like this massive cargo ship? Well, I feel like we've righted the ship. I think there was a lot of things wrong at launch. The biggest ones I saw people have complaints about were soft locks and the tutorial bug. I think that was basically made the game dead on arrival for a lot of people. The graphics, and that there was nothing to do. And so I kind of want to address those points and see how far we've come from launch, right? So as far as I'm aware, there's not really too many tutorial bugs anymore. There are far fewer soft locks. I still think there are some trouble issues. I say this pretty much every video now at this point. Soft locks have gotten better. There are still a few around, and it seems like they're probably affecting older devices more than anything. These soft locks often have a variety of causes and sources, but it seems like they're hunting them down one after the other, and at a fairly decent pace, I would say. Especially since Chapter 4 was released, it seems like they've kind of focused a lot of their efforts in, okay, we need to make sure that this is no longer an issue. I'm really glad to see that. There have been actually massive graphics improvements. Like, let's take a look. We're going to talk about Tana in a minute, but like, it's this one right here. This is what the game used to look like. It doesn't look like that anymore, right? Like, it looks so much better. So I'm very happy with that. That's a good sign. They've made massive graphical improvements, and it kind of slid under the radar for a while. The game looks good. The art style looks good. It looks much better than this, right? I like the stained glass art. I think the character designs, especially the recent ones, right? Balin looks incredible. Rumel's shield looks incredible. The Balrog, my big beautiful boy, he looks amazing. I think the Black Beast looks great too. A lot of the animations, some of them are really standout stellar. Like, they look good. So we've made a lot of progress there. Just even the UI elements in the game look very good compared to where we were at launch. I think that's been a big update. In terms of content, we've gotten all 4 of the raid chapters out now. They launched raids, what, 2 months after launch? And then, yeah, we have all 4 chapters out now, a chapter a month. That's a pretty good clip. I think a lot of people will just automatically default and say, well, it should have launched with raids. And I think most people agree with you. Yeah, it should have launched with raids. But it didn't. And so I think the next question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, it didn't, but now it has a full raid. How was the release? How is the raid? And I think the answer is they released it at a good pace, much faster than I was expecting. They kept their timeline of 1 chapter a month. That was really important. And I think it worked pretty well as like one big piece of content per month that we could kind of sink our teeth into. And it's pretty good, especially after the chapter 1 changes. I very much enjoy the raid. And it's kind of this thing, I really like the design of the raid because it lets you can spend all day doing your raid, right? You can spend as much time as you want optimizing for points and team compositions and trying things out. It has that level of depth. But if you want to auto, you can also kind of auto sometimes, right? And I think that means that is a good way to design the raid. There's kind of different levels of enjoyment you can have with it. I think the reward system is the same way. I know people get peeved that like you can't collect multiple guild reward boxes, or that the guild reward boxes don't scale up. I personally think that is a good design decision, because if you didn't do that, it would basically counteract the whole purpose of making sure that everybody can choose their own difficulty per team level. So I'm a big fan of that. And I also like that, it's every like 2 boxes after you get to that you get an increase in Gandalf shards, if that makes sense, right? So box, 2 and 3 have 5 Gandalf shards, and then 4 and 5 have 15 Gandalf shards, right? So I like that, like, unless you're making a big push to the next box, you can kind of chill and relax and not get burnt out on trying to do a bunch of raid stuff. I think it's a great design. I think they rolled it out effectively. They listened to feedback on Chapter 1, fixed that. It's a good raid. I'm pretty pleased with it. Speaking of Chapter 1, I've said this a million times too, and I'm going to keep harping on it because I do think it's important to point out communication has greatly objectively increased over the past 2 months, I would say. We've seen more developer, sided communication stuff from the developers themselves. So the Tawna interview being the first big example, I would say, and then the Reddit AMA being another example, but just also giving us better senses of timelines of when to expect things. And I think so far, people have also then given a little bit of leeway. Maybe there hasn't been a big test of this yet, but people have given a little bit of leeway saying, oh, well, okay, they said this time frame, and maybe they didn't quite meet the mark. Something came up because of it's a live service game. And then saying, okay, no worries. You gave us the heads up originally, and we appreciate that. I think it's actually been pretty good. And across the board, I do feel like this community is actually pretty reasonable and level-headed and like has a decent understanding. There's, of course, always going to be people who are on both ends of the spectrum, right? Either nothing the game will do will ever please them, and like nothing the game will do will ever make them speak out against the game. I actually feel like majority of people in this community are like, okay, that was good. Okay, that was bad. They can see that there is objectively like good things and bad things, which is actually very awesome to see. The Journey Ahead posts are also pretty substantial, and they don't feel like vapid to me. They feel like they have a little bit of meat on the bones there, and they're not just giving completely vague stuff. They do give us heads up for what's to come. And like, I expect the one that we're going to get in November, which will be our third one, will have some pretty meaty stuff in it. And that will sort of set the precedent moving forward. Okay, this is what we can expect from these large pieces of communication that we get from the developers. Big fan of that. I don't think they go above and beyond, necessarily, but it checks the box. I think it does its job. So what are some of the things I think they actually do need to work on? Well, I think they need to start sprinkling in some quality of life stuff. Achievements of system of some sort, I should say. Increasing the number of quests we have. Guild and raid management stuff, I think, is the one that people have requested for a long time that I think would be good to add. So just a better way to view raid scores, right? I think this screen is fine if you want a more detailed view, but perhaps maybe a zoomed out, like one level back screen that just gives people's total score for that particular chapter or the total raid score across the guild, maybe see some tracking progress. I don't know. It'd be really great is a way to essentially have, you can export this data so that, guild leaders and whatnot can work with it outside of the game and do what they need to do. Raid key tracking in the guild here would also be pretty good. I don't know how useful that is anymore because they've switched to just 150 keys at 8 a.m. UTC, so I think it's mostly okay at this point. Maybe that's something they put on the back burner, but just a little bit of quality of life stuff that I think they should sprinkle in. One of my things that annoys the crap out of me is when you buy something, right? Let's buy this glass vial here. And then it zooms you back all the way up to the top. So there's just some quality of life stuff that I think they can sprinkle into the next few updates now that they have the Chapter 4 fixes out. I do think this is probably the right order of things that they did, right? Get out the raid, work on bug fixes, and then moving forward, you're working on the new progression system, a new game mode, and this is probably time to start sprinkling in some of those quality of life improvements. I think another big one, especially as we move into something like multi-squad PvP, is going to be giving more API access to LOTR.GG. I know they talked about it in the Reddit AMA. I'm looking forward to seeing that for the future. I think some enjoyment people get out of the multi-squad PvP is being able to scout your opponent, see what they've been up to, see if you can predict exactly what they're going to do. Even just the ability to look at their roster and see if you could predict what they're going to put on offense, what they're going to put on defense, have that sort of capability, see what works, see what doesn't work. I think that would also be a great guild management tool as well. Just being able to see what your guild has, what other guilds are doing, even raid stuff, what teams are people using, all that sort of stuff. I think it's also going to be useful when glyphs come out, right? You can see, oh, X number of people have decided to put this glyph set or whatever on this character. That to me is probably an indicator that that's a useful one. Maybe it's not, but I think that's useful sort of stuff that people that want to get more into the weeds in the game, into the details, into the deeper levels of the game, they can do that if they choose to. It just makes things overall a little bit more clear as to what works, what doesn't work, as opposed to like anecdotal sort of evidence, right? Then you can say, oh, we have statistics on what works, what doesn't work for raids, PvP, whatnot, right? One other quality of life thing that I think they should probably work on, and I'm very happy with how Chapter 4, like the Balrog looks, and I like the mechanics of it. Oh my god, this scrolling sometimes is very slow, but I do think the background, somebody pointed this out in one of my live streams, and I now agree with them pretty handily, is that the background for the Balrog should probably get a pass, get a little bit of improvement, a little bit finer detail. I also really think that it would be cool if they had like a different soundtrack that plays during the Chapter 4 fight. It is their crowning jewel of content at the moment, so I think it would be cool down the line, while this continues to be like a big fight that you engage with in your guild, is to kind of sprinkle in these extra, cherry on top quality of life stuff, or just, general polish stuff that would make it even better. I think hopefully they will have some time to get to some of that stuff as we move forward. Another thing I think they need to fix, which everybody knows this at this point, right, is of course the challenge store. I do like that the change they made initially to kind of put this band-aid on the situation, to kind of stymie people being outraged about it. And I think it's pretty effective, right? You get more shards, they increase the number of shards, and they decrease the cost per shard, basically to 300. That greatly, greatly decreases the amount of time it takes to farm one of these characters, of course, and they change the pricing of T-Beb to be in line with Bolg and Halbrand. I think these are really great changes. It still has this issue where, like, right, hard nodes you can refresh, and you can spend energy on them again, and you use gems, but that's like a choice you can make, and maybe you're doing well in Arena, and so you've got these extra gems to spare, and you want to go hard on one particular farm because you think that's going to be a good character for your PvP, for your Arena team, or for, like, raids or whatever. That's a choice you can end up making, and I like that it gives agency in that way. Not the case here with the challenge store, right? You can refresh it as much as you want, but you just don't have the currency to buy more. So it's kind of useless in that way, right? So you're kind of hard capped at this. It's 315 days to get 810 shards, basically, from the challenge store. We do know that they are going to, this is step one, right? They're going to do another step. They could probably, I hope, well, we'll see what they do, but my guess is that they will do something simple, like just increase the amount of challenge currency we get. They can do that from the challenge itself, or maybe they throw it into a daily objective. Maybe they throw it into an interesting kind of new game mode in a different way. That's all. I think we'll see how that plays out. I think they'll probably implement the second step to this by the end of the year, would be my guess. So happy with this. Still needs fixing, so obviously we're keeping an eye on it. But happy with the first change they made. We'll see what they do next. Okay, one of the biggest pet peeves I currently have in this game is the lack of access to epic ability materials, those green ability materials for free-to-play players. I know some people are saying, oh, they had that offer that was 600 ability material, like 600 gems for some amount of ability materials. That's not free-to-play access. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean a way that they can reliably farm these materials so that they can make the choice to bring up these leaders, right? So if we just go and look, if I sort here by leader, how many leaders do we have in the game? That's 5, 10, 15, 16. Some of them are not really available, right? Nobody's really got Gandalf except one person at the moment. And some of them don't make as much sense. Again, Halbrand's also pretty limited in Bolg just because you can't get the stars on them. Same with T-Beb, so 3 of those leaders. So there's still some limited amount of leaders you can use, but everybody who is free to play, who is focused on getting Elrond, just got Elrond. And I think his leadership ability is really important. And you should be able to get to level 6 on his leadership ability, especially this +1 boon duration, if you're a free to play player. Like, that should be something you should do. And hopefully it comes in like Guild Chapter 6 or something, and, it just takes a lot of time, but it just actually, you know what? Bring it in. Bring it in. Let's just bring the camera. There we go. Just bring it in. CG. We need a way for free-to-play players to be able to access these epic ability materials. I think it's going to be necessary moving forward. So what I'm hoping is that you have a way to do that gets implemented before the end of the year. My guess, this is a prediction I have, is that we're going to see some new campaigns by the end of the year on the Light, Shadow, and Guild side. And then maybe they'll be included in that. But I hope it's sooner rather than later, because it should have happened either around or right before Elrond returned. The next best time to implement that is now and soon. So I'll get off my soapbox. It's my biggest pet peeve right now. Yeah. The biggest thing that this game probably needs, though, at the moment is just an increase in the player base. We need to see player growth. This kind of touches all aspects of the game, right? Talking about past content, the launch, all that sort of stuff. Talking about content creators, whether they're leaving or not. Players, whether they're leaving or not. Are we getting enough new players? What does future content look like? What about ad spending? How are they approaching? All of this is connected to the player base and whether it is growing or not. And I think it is most important that we end up focusing on that. Torm talked about it in episode 4 of Boons and Banes. He basically made a burner account to see how fast the Arena Shard was growing. We're on Arena Shard 12, or at least we were when he was doing this. At the start of Arena Shard 12, we were getting about 12 new players per hour into the Arena Shard. When he made his burner account, we were getting about 6 players per hour into the Arena Shard. So a slowdown in the number of new players we're getting. I do think we've, sort of stopped the bleeding is the way I would put it. I think people who are currently playing the game are somewhat invested in playing the game. And that's a good thing. And now it's just, we need to bring a lot of people into the fold, a huge number of players into the fold, and get them to play the game as well. So I do want to talk about Tawna leaving the game. This is his video announcing that he's stepping away from content creation and the game. And this is pretty disheartening for me. I think, he was basically the champion, the face of the biggest content creator for this game. And it's disheartening to see him step away from that. And he goes through his reasons in this particular video, talking about sort of things that bother him. He doesn't feel that there's like a good amount of content for him to engage with. But I also think it's probably fair to say that the sort of effort to reward ratio for making content for this game is not something that's good enough for him, right? Especially compared to other games where he's more established, like MSF. This doesn't make sense to make content for this game with the amount of players that are watching content for this game. This all connects back to growing the player base, right? It just doesn't make sense for now. So this is pretty sad for me to see, and I do hope and think he will eventually return down the line. He says that in the video as well, that once they kind of get a few more things fleshed out, he will consider coming back and playing, and probably then making content for the game as well. I did want to talk about it briefly. I do think this is a blow. And moving forward, this is something that we need to consider. Why is this happening? And he says, because there's just not enough content. It sort of transitions me into what I want to talk about next, which is that particular claim. So I've seen it from a number of, not just Tawna, but a number of content creators. I've seen it from people in Discord as well. I personally disagree with that particular claim. And but that doesn't mean I don't want to understand why people feel that way, because I do. I do think that if you want to spend all of your time doing raids, you can, and that is meaningful content to me because it has meaningful rewards attached to it. And it's got a lot of depth to it. Each chapter has its own mechanics, even some hidden mechanics, right, that make it a challenge, I would say. So they've released a chapter each month. I think that's been pretty good. But I do think if you aren't that interested in the raids, or if you're just going into the raids and pressing auto, that is not going to be a meaningful amount of content for you. And I do think there is a group of players who play this game whose main enjoyment is getting resources and upgrading their roster. That's not to say you can either pick one or the other. You can only enjoy raids, or you can enjoy the roster progression. I think they just derive a lot more entertainment from that, and maybe not so much in getting into the weeds and timing things for raids in all of your teams and spending hours doing that, right? Which I can understand. That's a totally fair way to play the game, I completely understand that. I do think if you are in that camp, then yes, raids don't count as much as content as you would like. But kind of from my perspective, because I disagree with that, I would prefer that they don't just pedal out and shove out just kind of simmable content that just, yes, you're spending time in game, but it's not worthwhile time. It's not engaging time. I think I would prefer that they release game modes that have meaningful and engaging content. So I don't think a Galactic War mode is gonna, I don't know. It just doesn't seem that good to me. I think you can do a type of tower mode like Galactic War, Tower, or even Blitz, which is not a tower type mode, but something like that that has that repeatable content in a cool and meaningful way. But that takes time to develop and ideate on and all of those sorts of things. And so I specifically really disagree with the idea that they can just copy game modes from when SWGOH was first released, like Galactic War, put them in this game, reskin them to be Lord of the Rings, and then call it a day, because it's just not good. It's not fun. It's not a fun mode, right? I think there are better ways to do it, and they want to do things better. I think this raid design, drawing a lot of inspiration from the most recent Crate raid, is a good example of that. So I understand the complaints about no content. I personally disagree. I think the raid is great content. I do think that once we have the glyph system and the multi-squad PvP, we will be in a much better place content-wise for people who fall across a different spectrum of camps as to what counts as content or not. And to be clear, I do not consider a progression system just content, right? I do think glyphs have an opportunity to be considered content, even though it is a progression system, because I think it interacts with the past content that they released, the raids, very well. It's going to connect to that, and then also it's going to connect to the future multi-squad PvP content. And I think it's probably going to have a lot of bit of depth to it, but marquees are not content in my book, and just increasing like the level cap or the gear tier is not content in my book either. So that level of progression system implementation is not content for me. I do think something like glyphs has the potential to be considered content. I will say I'm very curious as to how they're going to implement the glyph system and how they're going to implement multi-squad PvP. It appears to be different enough from SWGOH, right? I like that the set bonuses that they've given us appear to be, different, not just raw stats. They have a functionality to them. I like that aspect of it. Curious to see how the whole system works. I'm probably going to have gripes with it, right? I think that's going to be the case, but I am curious to see how it works. I am curious to see what layers it adds to the game, how that's going to affect raids. Also curious about multi-squad PvP, how they're going to roll that out. They mentioned it's probably going to be daily and basically replace Squad Arena, right? But doing a GAC daily seems very time consuming. So I'm curious as to what they're going to do to kind of solve that problem and how it's going to be rolled out, what the rewards are like, how is it going to be competitive, all that stuff. I'm very curious about it. And hopefully they give us some really juicy details on that in the November journey ahead. But for now, I'm mostly curious about what this new content is going to be, and cautiously optimistic, I should say. But cautiously, very cautiously. I think I want to transition into, once again, talking about player base, but this time from a different angle. So we'll talk about ad spending and what they're doing on that particular front that at least I'm aware of. So initially, they basically gave some deals to Dorky Dad and Boylon to advertise this particular game on their MSF channels, right? Trying to draw player base from the MSF community. They didn't do it for the SWGOH creators, which I guess makes sense because it's under the same house, right? They don't want to draw player bases from there necessarily. They kind of do want to draw it from their direct competitor, MSF. I think this is a great idea. I like that they did this. This was pretty cool. Just kind of get the name of the game out there. Of course, they need to do other sort of ad spending as well. And they've done some other things, right? So they've done like the fantasy subreddit AMA. Looking back, I'm not sure how good of an option that was. And this is kind of going to bring up some of the problems I have. It's mostly like a book recommendation subreddit from what Torm and I could tell. And if the idea was to just like get the word out that it was out there, maybe that was a good idea. But what ended up happening, at least in my estimation, was essentially all the people who are already on Discord just hunting for any information they can get went onto the Reddit and just filled it up with questions they have specifically about the game. So I don't know how good it was at bringing in new players. Like if I had not heard of this game before, clicked on the AMA and then saw all the comments in there, I might be a little, taken aback. Might be a little too much. But I do think it was really great for the community because we got a lot of information out of it, including, essentially speed limits on glyphs at +90. We got a little hint on the next legendary being from The Hobbit, timing of stuff, all that sort of thing. So actually, I don't want to bash it too much because I think it was a great outreach opportunity, but if its goal was to, again, bring in a bunch of players to the player base, I don't know if it accomplished that. One of the more recent things that they've sent out was this Did You Know Gaming video. And I actually have a lot of specific gripes with this, right? So they said at the beginning of the video, basically CG paid them $10,000, which they then will donate to the preservation of old video games and memorabilia and that sort of stuff. There's a museum in England, I think, which is great. I think that's a great cause. And you're essentially paying, but it's going to a charity, and then you get a lot of exposure. This 2.41 million subscribers. But as you can see what I have here, right, this is beta footage or like very early on footage. The game doesn't look like this anymore. The game looks much better than this. And I think that's a problem. There's also just some sort of factual stuff that's a little bit wrong in here. Let's see if I can find it really quick. So like, this was the Eller here before redesign, but I don't know. My Elra here, I guess, didn't get the update, right? So I think this was just a mistake in here because, let's see. I think they have the before or after redesign, and it's like, yeah, this is the after redesign, but it just looks bland. It looks much better now. So I think it's a little mistake like that. And then I think my biggest pet peeve probably with this whole video, it's equally tied with showing the beta footage stuff, is that they don't actually show gameplay with the Balrog. This is the crowning jewel of content in the game at the moment. I think that was a really big missed opportunity. If people at the end of this video, or even at the beginning of this video, actually the beginning of the video would be better, just to get people to continue like watching it, right? Get people hooked. Show that Balrog fight. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's a lot of fun. Show that off. It's good. They did good work on it. I think they should be showing that off. They show some cinematics, which are great, but like even the in-game footage of the Balrog fight is really awesome to look at, right? His transformations are killer. So just even showing a little clip of that. I just think this needed to be a little bit better. I guess is my estimation on that. If you're going to be paying that much money, I think it's got to be pretty close to perfect. I know people make mistakes and things like get rushed and whatnot, but yeah, I just think I want this to do well, right? I want this to do well and the game continue to grow and for us to get new players. And I think there's just been a few opportunities here that didn't get completely capitalized on. Something that is pretty great to see, though, is that they got selected for the Google Play Best of 2023 Users' Choice Awards. So you can go vote for them in that particular poll there. They got nominated. I think this is great. And it's kind of shows that at least the developers, when they do good stuff and when they do things like increase communication and fix things that we want fixed and in a fast and timely manner, that, people respond pretty well to that. So this is awesome to see. I really like this. And, when somebody's in the Play Store and like thinking about what game they want to play next, or even if they're just viewing the nominees for this particular game or the awards or whatnot, this might be a deciding factor for them just because they're like, oh, this was recognized. This was good. So I'm actually very happy to see this. One of the last things I want to talk about here before we do like a summary wrap up sort of thing is that these games often have a little bit of population cycle in, cycle out when related media to the franchise come out, right? So when Mandalorian came out, Swigo saw a huge boost in players. I think that's pretty natural. People are like, oh, yes, I love Star Wars. I forgot how much I love Star Wars. Maybe not forget. My passion for Star Wars was reinvigorated, I should say. And, now I want to continue playing this game that is taking place in the Star Wars universe. So what does Lord of the Rings have on the future docket here, right? Well, Return to Moria just came out. It would be great if some of the people who are playing Return to Moria also then get wind of this game. So we should hopefully be, I don't know anything about marketing, but hopefully be advertising to people who have bought or are interested in Return to Moria, that particular demographic. Get those people in here playing this game. I see a lot of you all playing that game, right? I see on Discord, Return to Moria, Moria on the side panel, right? So people seem to be playing that a lot. That's great. I do also want to play that game eventually. Maybe we'll do something on stream with some viewers. Pretty excited about that. But what else is coming for Lord of the Rings? Well, we have the War of Rohirrim, which is an animated Lord of the Rings movie. Helm Hammerhand, voiced by Brian Cox. We've got the original actress for Éowyn, who's also going to be Éowyn's voice. We're going to get Wolf and Freka. This is going to be awesome, I think. This is going to be really cool, but doesn't come out until the end of next year. What about Rings of Power Season 2? Regardless of how you feel about Rings of Power, having associated Lord of the Rings media come out will bring people to this game. So put your feelings about it aside for a second, and let's just consider what's going to happen when this comes out. Well, when is it coming out? And it looks like it may come out at the end of 2024, but it probably got pushed to 2025, 2026. There's also like there's a Amazon Lord of the Rings MMO that's in development, but who knows when that's going to be released or if it will be released at all as well. So what that means is that for 2024, there is basically no big media piece attached to the Lord of the Rings IP that is coming out that I'm aware of. That means this game has to stand on its own two legs and get running. And I think the best way to do that is through continuing to do the things they've done to right the ship, and then now we're going to get glyphs, and now we're going to get multi-squad PvP. And so the pieces are in place, and if those pieces are all out by early next year, let's say, before March next year or around March next year, then I think this game is probably in a good position to really get big and grow. Again, I don't know anything about marketing. I don't know anything about ad spending and all that sort of thing, but I do think it would also be pretty wise to ramp up ad spending now that the Chapter 4 of the Mines of Moria is out. We're probably going to see a new legendary soon. Do some holiday ad spending when people have some downtime, right? They're maybe with their family. Get them to just look at the game, check it out, maybe get some new players involved there. Again, I don't know anything about ad spending or marketing, but that seems like a kind of a no-brainer to me. I do think one of the current best media campaigns for a game right now is probably coming from Marvel Snap, which obviously is a much bigger game. They have a lot of players, and so they have a big marketing ad budget to work with. So we're not going to get something like that, but I think it's something to emulate. I think their ads are just very effective at drawing people in, and they know who to kind of work with to make sure that the demographic of people who play their game are kind of like, oh, that's something I also watch and do, and it shows up in the right places. And they're just very, very good at that. And I would like to see them do something similar for this particular game, just probably have to get a little bit more creative with how you roll that out, how you spend the money, because the budget's probably not as big. But I think Marvel Snap is a game that maybe we should look at, or maybe they should look at and try to emulate some of the aspects of their kind of ad campaign and media blitzing. I know people love talking about Raid Shadow Legends and their media blitz, but I think basically Raid did it, and now what are you going to do, right? You're just going to follow the Raid Shadow Legends method. It doesn't, I don't know how well that's going to work, but I do think Marvel Snap is very effective and something that maybe can be looked at and say, oh, if they did this, and this, and that was very effective. So kind of to wrap up here, I think we've righted the ship. We're moving in the right direction, right? We've moved the big ship, and so it's not stuck in the canal anymore, and we can steam forward and steam ahead, and we can put ourselves in a good position. And I think the developers plan on doing that, and if they nail the next few months here, and they nail glyphs, and they nail multi-squad PvP, I think that puts this game in a very solid position for the rest of 2024. I'm cautiously optimistic. I've polled people in my Discord, I've polled people in my guild. They're also cautiously optimistic. I think the big thing that touches all of the other pieces of this game that we've talked about so far, though, is the player base and the size of the player base. And there needs to be a big push to get in new players. And I hope that this is going to sound weird, I guess, but I hope that like the content creator community here can kind of do their part in that when we see new players and they come into the game, they can look on YouTube and look on Discord and see content that they also think is worth watching, and they want to engage with the community. Because to be frank, I think this community is pretty fun to hang out with. It's full of people who really love Lord of the Rings and are very dedicated about that. People who are very dedicated about the game, but they're fun and objective and reasonable and level-headed and funny and a lot of those things. And I'm enjoying kind of seeing how all of this is developing. I think a lot of other people are too. But let me know what you think down in the comments, or hop into the Discord and let me know what you think there too. Are you cautiously optimistic? What do you think are the biggest things that need to change? Is there something I forgot or left off? I usually forget like one big thing where after the fact, after the video, I'm just like, oh, how did I leave that out? But I think I covered mostly everything that I wanted to talk about today. With that, thanks for watching. Take it easy.